Brave, what is your bad point?
So it feels like a little bit of an obvious one, given sort of their opening to Pro League, but my bad point is the FaZe performances as of late.
Okay.
Maybe I honestly I had a little look, watched a few previous episodes. I was like, has anyone brought this up? Has anyone talked about it? It seems like not. Maybe, way back, maybe because they have been obviously on a bit of a downturn for a while. But I think what really brings it to the forefront for me is just the Cologne performance, right? Not only losing to Saw, obviously huge game for Saw, huge clutch for like Mutiris, career defining for those guys, of course. But just the way that they played as well, like really didn't look like themselves, really didn't look like they were sort of fully in it. You listen to sort of like the player comms, which is a really nice touch that we've been having a bit more of, like live, as it were, rather than just sort of at the half. And it just felt like maybe Frozen was being like the most vocal. Beyond that, there wasn't a lot in the mid round. I don't even know that Carrigan was necessarily in there loads. I'm not sure where they're at. Also, having seen them at Pro League, obviously they had this loss against Sangal. They did beat them sort of after that to make the playoffs. But I think like this team I think they're just burnt out, I don't know. And they've talked about it a lot, of course. But I think it really is coming to a head now where you've got players like Carrigan who, has maybe achieved his glory and just needs a little bit of a break, like an extended kind of break. Because I can imagine that during player breaks and things like this, a team like FaZe still working. But it's tough to watch, like for some of the players, and they're a team that I think it feels like most of the Counter-Strike community are behind. We always want them to do well. They always get like the positive narratives of like, oh, they start off slow in groups, guys. Don't worry about it. They'll pick their game up and everything. And I think that they've stopped performing. What I will say in their defense, obviously, it's an open floor in terms of where you guys want to go with it. But in their defense, I will say that coming second so very often has got to be so disheartening. And I think there is maybe a little bit of solace in the fact for them that it's like, okay, well, we lost in a few of these deeper run positions, in a few of these quarterfinals, whatever it may be. Potentially not a bad thing for them to like remember what it is to kind of lose and be like, all right, it wasn't our day, rather than in that final, like we could have had it, we could have had it, we could have had it, we could have had it. Also, maybe as well a severe cool off after winning Chengdu. It's like, all right, we finally won one. Like the psychology, I think, is just sort of chilling for them and cooling off, right? That there's still this obviously FaZe level that they have, but I think that it is really, really difficult for them to keep at that and to perform to that kind of level. And I just think there's a couple of players in here where Rain is ever the soldier and all this kind of stuff. But again, maybe coming to sort of the end of his tenure, just because I feel like they need a little bit more energy. You've got New Blood in Frozen. Rop's always been a bit quieter. Brokey, we know, is maybe vocal in game, not so much out. But I think that they need a little bit more. And maybe it is like Carrigan feels like the obvious sort of thing, that it's like his numbers, his play style might just be dying off. And I think that their sort of downturn recently is sort of just due to this fact that they've been on the burnout. They've been playing way too much, and they've just not really had a break for like 2 years. It feels like some of these players, where they've just been on a constant run, so many expectations, and very much always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They've had some really, really tough losses since CS2 has come out. I think that Carrigan really wanted Kato, really wanted the major, and I don't know, you just have a few in here where they're getting a little indifferent, they're getting a little complacent. I don't know what you guys make of that.
I feel like, man, I think I would need to do a bigger breakdown of why FaZe seem like they're behind. I feel like for me, when I watch them, they just sometimes rely on individuals a little too much on their T sides, but I would have to really look back at it, because when I've seen FaZe be bad before on T sides, sometimes they just kind of throw sort of like outdated nades, or it feels like they haven't updated their playbook as much. And that was something that Neo was really good at when he first joined the team. I feel like the honeymoon was really strong for him, where he brought a lot to the table. They talked about it in interviews, how he brought a lot of new ideas, new strats. I'm not sure if they're doing that the same way that they were before, but I also feel like one thing is that I just never really, I still hold out for FaZe. I still hold out in a way where I'm just like, Man, until it's the biggest stage at the biggest moment, then I'll judge FaZe, but I'm not going to really judge, for example, like a BO3 loss to Sangol as the opening game of an ESL Pro League where they know they have 3 lives. Like, this format is so forgiving that they're still going to just cruise through the rest of the games almost surely, and as long as they just don't, like, then we have to, like, they're so consistently good at making it out of groups that if they fail, say, to make playoffs for 2 tournaments in a row, then I would start ringing some alarm bells for these other tournaments. But if they're still making playoffs of Cologne, if they're still going to make playoffs of Pro League, I think they already did actually, then and they're going to just go pretty much like top 8, top 4, whatever the playoffs is of every single tournament they play, then it's like it's kind of like I call them the great procrastinators, and I've been calling them that for a couple of years because I just feel like they just don't care that much until the biggest moment. And they're kind of like the bad student that's kind of smart, that knows he can just cram at the last second and then just up his game 15%, 25% for that big exam. And that's just where I am with FaZe, where I don't think they are probably putting in 100% for ESL Pro League day 1, Group A, match 1, upper bracket 1. Like, it's just like that doesn't excite them at all. Studio doesn't excite them, and I feel like that's a bad habit, though, and I think that those bad habits have come back to bite them, which is why they've only won 1 event, despite the fact that, in my eyes, they have the skill to win more than just 1 event this year, more than just a Chengdu. It's probably because they're just kind of like coasting in a way. But yeah, maybe I'll do a deeper dive on them myself, because I would love to know the real, like, who in the server is failing to their role, with the exception that Rops he has been worse, but like, I don't really know if that's everything in this whole picture.
Yeah, I'll actually pick up on the last point. I do think the problem with FaZe, and it's actually been the same way ever since Rops joined the team in 2022, which is they only have 2 modes. They either look amazing and they can beat anyone, they can win the tournament, which is what people expect both in CS2. That's why, if you notice, in that last year of CS2, the criticism got really harsh when they were finally, like, odd times just bombing a tournament, like not even making a deep run. And then because they did the glow up again in CS2, as he said, they were in all those finals, I feel like people over scrutinize FaZe failure. Like, if you notice, it's never like, oh, they've dropped off, what do they need to do to fix it? It's always, every time, if you're a noob, it's kick Carrigan, which is why actually when Austin gave like an interesting approach on that, it was actually so unique, because it wasn't just he isn't fragging, it was like actually a decent angle on why you might do it. But I think the other angle is then just people pick whoever they don't like. If they don't like Robs, kick him, he's baiting. If they think Frozen's not as good as he should be, you need a star player. If you want, I don't know, fucking Simple to join as an AWP, you got to kick Brokey, whatever angle people take. But I agree with Maui. I actually think people go too far the opposite way with the overcorrection. They make every single playoffs. Like, if you don't know, guys, the one tournament they didn't make playoffs of this year was Blast, and then they just won the showdown anyway, so they're back into the Blast qualifier. So they're in every fucking tournament, so they can't be bad, guys. Like, understand, if you're in every single top 8, you are still a good team. Like, something fundamentally does work about your team. In fact, I'd even say, for all the people sort of naysaying them, there's not many teams can beat FaZe twice in a row, guys. Go look it up. Like, they might lose, like Sangol found. You can beat them once, but you won't just like beat them 2-3 times in a row. It doesn't happen. Not many teams can do it. You have to be the best teams pretty much to do that. If you look at the actual players, if you want to diagnose some of their problems, I mean, I actually think this is an example of why, when they were so good in 2022, I did think they should be hailed as like one of the best teams to ever play Counter-Strike. Because when I say that line, like they do it by committee, it actually makes it sound, I think, to a fan, like it's easier to do it by committee. It's actually harder. It's actually harder. It's why I think when he did it in the Mouse Sports team with Rops, Frozen and Woxic, it was amazing. Because by definition, guys, the reason it's easier to not do it by committee and just have the Ziwu, the Monacy, the Donk, is you're not really doing what they do. They're taking care of that part. And then you manage the rest of the team. You manage the maps and the seaside calls and the backups and what do we do when he dies? When you do it by committee, you either have to have the most god-tier man management ever, because you've got to keep essentially like 3 stars. It's like keeping plates spinning. You've got to keep them all sort of going at once. So you've got to have Brokey doing his JW moves at the same time that Rops is doing the godlike fucking Uber lurk. And in this world, then you have to get Frozen in the mix, so he's enough aggressive that he gets the kills, but he doesn't bait to like, fuck it, this is really hard, boys. And then Rain, the story goes, this is why why the joke is, the more you hear about FaZe, it's the other way around. The more impressive Carrigan's job sounds. So apparently Rain doesn't even have a playbook and is just doing whatever he wants, like some old school sports throwback where he's like, I've got it, coach, don't worry. And he just goes and, I don't know, this analogy here would be like, I don't know, he's like some free safety that just shuts down every wide receiver without even having the game plan. Like, okay. So the problem you always come to at the end of every FaZe discussion is this. One, there's an obvious reason they're not as good as these other teams. They don't have a donk. Like, even if Frozen's stats are the best, look, Frozen is a really good player. He's probably a top 10 player. But the difference is, if we're talking about the impact of the donks, it's just so many levels above. Like, Frozen isn't going to 1v9 a whole best of 3 and win you it. He's not going to do that. He's not going to get a 90 kill performance like a donk or a Modesty will, sometimes even in a loss. That's not going to happen. But, like, you look at the squad, they're all pretty much still good players. Like Rops the last few months had a little glow up when Brokey had the glow down. So my problem is, I think in their team, there's so much pressure for like 2 or 3 people to have to play well at once. That's where you've got a hard spot. But I'll always put it back on you. So I want to ask each of you this. This is where no one has the fucking nuts to actually properly criticise FaZe. Because if you're going to criticise FaZe, you have to pick a player to remove. I'm not even saying bring someone in. Who you could bring in is hard to know who was available, who'd want to join. I'm just saying, I don't feel like anyone can get a bead on who you remove. That's why I thought the Austin angle a few months back of like, I'd take Carrigan out. It's obviously the most bold move ever. But I'll tell you what, if you pick anyone else, it's hard. Like, I'll give you the obvious example. Even if you do scriv the angle of Rain's getting kind of old, surely eventually he has to retire. Yeah, but he'll still, like clockwork, every 2.5 events just like pop off in a series and you'll be like, well, shit. How do I take out that player who's got no resources? He's just killing everyone. So who would you pick? Who would each of you, if you had to play? I'm saying like I force you to take one player out of FaZe. Who were you each taking?
Yeah.
Who would you pick?
I think my head immediately goes to Rops, to be honest, because I think that maybe in terms of the market for his roles, it's maybe a little bit easier to replace.
Right.
And then also it just sort of feels like he's the one that's lost his spark, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, we expected so much out from him. He was looking good at the start of CS2.
Oh, it was mega, yeah.
You know, we were like, this is going to be his game. And then he has just kind of dropped off. And I think that the drop off, there's maybe, again, it's, you know, deeper checkouts here.
Okay.
But there's maybe a bit of a correlation in terms of like with Frozen joining.
Okay.
And sort of the Rops drop. Maybe that is a switch over of like resources a little bit, Frozen wanting a little bit more. I think it's not even going to be like an intentional thing that they've, you know, worked out beforehand, that it's like, okay, Frozen's going to get these roles. I think it is more like in the mid round in the game, because Frozen's just a much more vocal and like asks for these types of things that maybe Rops in the past would have been able to push for, if that makes sense. So I think there's a little bit of like, obviously not team cohesion or whatever, but maybe friction in terms of the end product between those two players. And it feels like Rops is maybe the easiest to, well, I mean, it is Rops, right? But like in terms of the roles and whatnot, I think that he would be a little bit easier to replace. And then just the fact that it's just not the Rops that we know at the moment. If you had to make it like tomorrow kind of thing is maybe my caveat for sure, because he could easily leave the team, go somewhere else and return to form, you know, if given the same kind of resources. But yeah, I think that he has to be the player for me that, I don't know, he's not causing problems. It's always tough. It's always tough.
It's a problem.
Like, you know, with where to go.
By the way, what you just said at the end there is also what I was actually going to reply, which is it's the same thing I've said every time people on these shows criticize Vitality members. So, you know, when there's times when people will be like, I think Spink Spate's too much. So, you know what? Kick him out the team. Go on. Right, let's imagine you kick him out. Right, we'll take him. So, same thing, Scriv. You just kick Drops out of the team. Well, you know what? Vitality will take him. You know what I mean? GT will take him. And then, listen, in 3 months, I'll tell you what, you're going to be fucking going, shit. Look at that best of 3. Go on then, Maui. What was your pick be? Who you kicking out of FaZe hypothetically?
I would just go with what I've been going with for the past like 3 years. I would just do Rain. I would just do Rain because I think that there's a handful of aggressive riflers right now that would die to be on FaZe. Xantares is 1. Elige is number 2. Like, give me one of those guys.
All right,
and, like this.
Maui, I'll give it one little gem. Okay, let's just say, what if I told you? Remember, we had Elige on a past episode. I asked him to his face, but what if I told you, a little bird told me, if it was actually like a real elite team, like Na'Vi or FaZe, Elige would move to Europe and join? What if I was to tell you that? Would that be interesting?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just
Oh,
going to
yeah,
plant
that'd
that
be great.
seed. See that seed? Put it out there. Just pour a little bit of water on it. Let the sun do its job. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying, I'll plant that seed. So I'm saying if you are out there, that would be interesting.
You know, I actually, in this space, operate in a way where, like, you know, some people give me leaks. Like, I get leaks.
Okay.
I don't bring them up on their shows. I don't really tweet about them. I don't even talk about them on stream necessarily. But one thing is that when the people that have accurately given me leaks give me them, I don't really just keep hounding them for more. Because I like to just kind of theory craft these roster moves.
It's also fun to figure out yourself, like you say. You don't want to know everything, do you? It's half the fun figuring out yourself what's hypothetically possible, right?
At least to FaZe for Rain would be unbelievable. I would root for this team. Like, this team would be like, all right, we're really cooking right here. Because the problem with FaZe is that, like, so many of their rounds on T side are, you know, I actually just criticized earlier when making my point about them is that I think their T sides can look a little bit iffy, like they don't really always seem the most well structured. But I'm also kind of like memory holding the fact that one of the reasons G2 and Spirit's T sides look as good as they do is because they have incredible entry riflers right now who are doing the heavy lifting for them in these positions, which is just like it's incredibly hard to get a 5v4 on T side. It's just so hard. But when you have an Elige, a Nico, a Donk, or a Xantares, it's not as hard. It makes things look a lot better, a lot easier. So yeah, that would be my move. And I guess like my 1B move is if we're going to still have that same narrative, which is sort of dated. Actually, it's not that dated because Frozen joined them a year ago. If we're going to go with that and Mouse is their farm academy, you could also go for Exertion for Rain. But my 1B would be just Yimpat for Rops. I think he's like the new, improved, upgraded version of him. I think he moves a little bit faster on his lurks. I think his anchoring has been better in general. So he desires less resources, and he actually is outputting better numbers than Rops. So as of right now, Yimpat for me is just a 1-for-1 upgrade for Rops.
Also, by the way, if people haven't noticed, I don't try to hide my biases. My actual like move for every single star player I like is just give him a Carrigan. That's why the joke is, even though he can't play right now, just fucking give Simple to him as well. Give any of these fucking guys. I mean, the real one I've mentioned in the past that no one even bothers to connect together is people in their brain still do that thing where they go Zemu French, Vitality French, Apex French, so they have to play together. It's like, bro, you know all those problems we're talking about with Zemu every fucking month. Give him to Carrigan and let's just see what happens. You know what I mean? Just give me that for 6 months. Let me see what Zemu piloted by Carrigan on T sides. Like, just give me 6 months of that, please.
The one guy I need to see piloted by Carrigan is Electronic gonna ruin FaZe if he goes.
Is that like the immovable object versus the irresistible force? It's like Carrigan's ability to make a star player play better, whereas like Electronic walks in the room, immediately everyone's vibes down, their roles just don't make sense to them, so they can't even read the strat book. Like there's some weird shit going on with that.
It's the anti-Nexa.
It's like he must just walk in the room, and you know, like that old meme of like scared to look at the alpha. Does Flit just start like counting his feet or something like, yeah, you just have all the roles, Mr. Electronic, sir. Sorry, sir. Like, I know what's going on with that. That's the biggest mystery of all.
Norbert's still doing well, but everybody just starts blaming him instead of Electronic for ruining the entire vibe.
I also love the idea, by the way, just as a random aside, that actually is still how it goes, where even though Norbert did get actually for real way better, every rumor is still just like, we're all gonna Men in Black that, including people in his own team. And every rumor's like, Norbert to be kicked next week. And you're like, why though? Why? And they're like, just kick him, he's fucking Norbert. Like, you can't win, can you?
Yeah, I know.
It's actually mad in it, I know.
It's like it's the one player where the nameplate is actually doing them a
it is
right now, and the eye test is actually helping him, if anything.
Yes, I agree. No, he just can't overcome the inertia of his old reputation, basically. It's actually just crushing him over like a tidal wave. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.